right now, global data centers consume about 2% of all the electricity generated on Earth.
Which is already a lot.
It is. But according to the deep technical and, economic sources we're looking at today, that number is actually projected to hit 7% in just a few short years.
Yeah, that's just a wild jump.
Right. And to put that into perspective for you, 7% of global power is roughly equivalent to the electricity consumption of the entire country of India.
Wow.
Just, dedicated entirely to keeping artificial intelligence from melting down.
It really, it completely shatters that illusion we all carry around in our pockets.
Yeah.
We talk about the cloud like it's this, weightless, airy, invisible realm where our data just happily floats around.
Exactly, like it's literal weather. But the physical reality is that the cloud is actually a massive, incredibly heavy, blisteringly hot warehouse of metal and wires.
Very hot. And it's a physical infrastructure problem that is currently pushing the absolute limits of, well, material physics.
So every time you open an app and say, type a prompt into an AI, or you ask a chatbot to summarize a document for you, you are triggering a massive chain reaction in the physical world.
Which means the traditional materials we've relied on for decades, to build computers, they are suddenly hitting a literal brick wall.
And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us today.
Yeah, a real mix of stuff.
We're pulling from deep technical teardowns on power electronics from Power Electronics World, some academic economic reviews on European policy from the IE Economics Review.
And live financial reports, right?
Yeah, exactly. Financial reports on a specific company that recently caught a massive viral social media surge.
It's quite the combination.
It is. So we're going to decode the hidden physical and, frankly, geopolitical infrastructure powering this next generation of AI. We want to understand exactly why the traditional silicon chip, like the total foundation of the modern digital age, why it just isn't enough anymore.
Right, because to understand why silicon is failing, we have to look at the sheer scale of the shift happening inside places like, NVIDIA's next-generation AI factories.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So to run these massive trillion-parameter AI models, data centers are having to completely re-architect how they handle electricity. They're shifting to megawatt-scale server racks.
Megawatt scale.
Yeah, and they're moving to 800-volt direct current, or VDC, power architectures.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because 800 volts of direct current sounds absolutely terrifying.
It is a lot of juice.
Why do we need that much raw, intense power just to run software?
Well, it comes down to moving the electricity efficiently. When you're trying to deliver a megawatt of power into a single server rack, traditional 54-volt bus bars they cannot handle the current.
A bus bar is essentially just like a thick metal pipe for electricity, right?
Essentially, yes. It's a solid bar of copper or aluminum that conducts a massive amount of current.
Yeah.
But if you try to push the power AI needs through a standard 54-volt system, the current is so high that the cables have to be incredibly thick.
Right.
And you lose a massive amount of energy as pure heat.
So they just melt.
Basically, yeah. So the physics workaround is to crank up the voltage. Because the higher the voltage, the more power you can deliver with less current.
Oh, I see.
That means thinner cables and way less energy lost as heat. Hence the massive jump to 800 VDC.
But there is a catch here. According to the engineering teardowns in our sources, traditional silicon chips, specifically the silicon MOSFETs that act as the standard switches to regulate all this power, they can't survive that kind of environment.
No, they are hitting their physical limits. A MOSFET is basically a tiny microscopic light switch, right?
Okay.
It turns the power on and off millions of times a second to step the voltage down to a level the AI processor can actually use.
Right, because the processor itself isn't running on 800 volts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you try to step down 800 volts using a silicon transistor, it becomes a massive bottleneck. The silicon component has to be physically larger just to handle the voltage. It operates way too slowly, and it generates an unacceptable amount of heat.
Which totally defeats the entire purpose.
Exactly.
You don't want bulky, overheating power converters taking up all your space when you need every possible square inch of that server rack for the actual AI processors. So how do we fix a fundamental physics problem like that?
By completely changing the material, we have to move beyond silicon. And this is where a material called gallium nitride, or GaN, enters the picture.
Chim.
Yeah. Specifically, the industry is moving toward GaN high electron mobility transistors.
Okay, I have to pause you again because high electron mobility transistor sounds like, I don't know, a piece of an engine from a spaceship.
It does sound intense.
I know the sources mention a heterostructure and things like that, but can we ground this for the listener? How does gallium nitride actually work without all the textbook jargon?
Yeah, sure. Let's build a mental model. So instead of a single chunk of material like a traditional silicon chip, think of a gallium nitride transistor as a microscopic sandwich.
A sandwich, okay.
Right. It layers gallium nitride with aluminum gallium nitride. And when you press these two specific materials together, their atomic structures create this really unique phenomenon right at the boundary line between them.
Like a chemical reaction?
Sort of. The industry calls it a two-dimensional electron gas.
Okay, still sounding a bit like science fiction. What does a 2D electron gas actually do?
Well, imagine trying to force a raging river through a standard garden hose. That is, silicon trying to handle high voltage. There's just massive resistance.
Right.
The 2D electron gas is more like a massive, perfectly smooth, frictionless spillway. Electrons can move through that specific two-dimensional layer with exceptionally high mobility and almost zero resistance.
Wow, almost zero.
Yeah, because there's so little friction, a gallium nitride device can switch on and off at least 10 times faster than a traditional silicon device.
10 times faster is an absurd leap in performance for hardware.
It really is. It changes the entire architecture of the server. Because it switches so quickly and so cleanly, it cuts the energy wasted just trying to operate the switch by about 80%.
That's huge.
It eliminates that slow, heat-generating lag you see in silicon, meaning it runs dramatically cooler. And because it's so incredibly efficient, engineers can shrink down all the surrounding magnetic components and capacitors on the circuit board.
So everything gets smaller.
Exactly. You end up saving up to 50% in physical board space.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If gallium nitride is this microscopic, frictionless spillway that is half the size, runs way cooler, and operates 10 times faster, why isn't it in every single device on the planet already?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. Like, if I open my laptop right now, it is full of silicon. Is this just a manufacturing bottleneck, or are tech companies just slow to change?
It's entirely about the maturity curve of manufacturing. I mean, we've spent over 50 years perfecting silicon fabrication. We know how to pull it out of the ground, process it flawlessly, and print it at a microscopic scale with incredibly high yields.
Right. It's cheap and reliable.
Exactly. Gallium nitride is the new kid on the block.
Yeah.
And for a long time, it was too expensive and, frankly, too difficult to manufacture at scale without defects.
But the data in our sources suggest that wall is finally crumbling, right?
Dramatically so.
Mm-hmm.
The sources detail companies like InnoScience that have already pushed past the experimental phase. They've shipped over 1.5 billion GaN devices, and they're currently scaling their fabrication capacity to produce 72,000 wafers per month by 2027.
With high yield?
With a 95% yield rate. The manufacturing science has finally caught up to the theoretical physics.
Which kind of forces us to look at the bigger picture here. Upgrading from silicon to gallium nitride isn't just a fun engineering project. The sources point out that controlling the manufacturing of these generation chips has become one of the most critical geopolitical issues of our time.
Oh, absolutely. It's rapidly becoming a matter of pure national security. Advanced chips, whether they're processing AI data or managing megawatt power loads like GaN, they are the lifeblood of modern economies.
They run everything.
Everything.
Great.
Radar systems, secure military communications, the entire global financial network.
And before we dive into the specific geopolitical strategies mentioned in our sources, it is really important to lay down a quick disclaimer here.
Yeah, definitely.
Our sources cover some pretty heavily charged political terrain regarding global supply chains, international trade dependencies, and national security policies, specifically between Europe, China, and Taiwan.
It's a very sensitive topic right now.
Exactly. So to be completely clear for everyone listening, we are impartially reporting the economic and policy analysis laid out in these academic and financial texts. We aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoint or taking sides.
Right.
We simply want to convey the stark realities that the industry is actually facing right now.
And the stark reality for regions like the European Union is that they are dangerously exposed. The COVID-19 pandemic, alongside rising tensions in East Asia, served as a massive, unavoidable wake-up call for them.
Right, because member states suddenly looked around and realized they only produce about 10% of the world's semiconductors.
Think about the panic that sets in at a governmental level.
Hmm.
You realize that if a single global supply chain snaps, your entire domestic auto industry grinds to a halt.
And you have zero domestic capacity to replace those chips.
None. Relying almost entirely on foreign suppliers for critical technology went from being a smart, globalized business strategy to being viewed as an absolutely unacceptable national liability.
Which brings us to the European Chips Act, or the ECA. The EU essentially slammed a 43 billion euro panic button on the desk.
That's a good way to put it.
They've set a highly aggressive goal to double their global market share from 10% to 20% by the year 2030.
Mobilizing 43 billion euros is a massive statement of intent, obviously, but the actual mechanics of how they are spending it is what really matters. They recognize that Europe has fantastic university research, great lab work, right?
Yeah.
But they struggle to translate that into massive, high-volume fabrication facilities. They actually call this the lab-to-fab bottleneck.
Lab to fab, I like that.
Yeah.
And to fix that, the ECA documents detail the creation of integrated production facilities and something called Open EU Foundries, or OEFs.
Right, and the Open EU Foundry concept is perhaps the most critical mechanism for fostering innovation here.
Walk us through how an OEF actually functions in the real world. Why does a startup care about this?
Let's create a hypothetical scenario. Imagine you and I form a brilliant tech startup. We design a revolutionary new power chip using gallium nitride. We have the patent, we have the software architecture perfectly mapped out, but we're working out of a rented office.
Right, we're broke.
Exactly. We certainly don't have the $3 or $4 billion required to build a microscopic cleanroom factory to actually print our chips. In the past, our idea would just die there, or we'd be forced to sell the patent to a massive overseas conglomerate.
But under the OEF model.
Under this model, the European Union is directly subsidizing massive established chip manufacturers on the strict condition that they dedicate a portion of their assembly line to smaller, fabless companies.
Like us?
Like us.
Yeah.
We can take our blueprint to a heavily subsidized Open EU Foundry, pay a reasonable fee, and they will physically test and manufacture our design. It completely shatters the barrier to entry for hardware innovation.
That's amazing. And individual member states are already aggressively pursuing these foundries, right? Germany seems to be acting as the vanguard here.
Oh, heavily. Germany is offering unprecedented subsidies to attract major global players like TSMC and Intel to build on German soil.
Yeah, the Intel project is a fascinating test case from the sources. Germany offered roughly 10 billion euros in subsidies to secure a massive 30 billion euro total investment for a mega fab in the city of Magdeburg.
It's a huge project.
But, as the academic review points out, you can't just legislate a factory into existence, because that massive Intel project is currently facing a 2-year delay.
Right, and the delay is tied to Intel's own internal financial restructuring, which perfectly highlights the vulnerability of the ECA's whole strategy.
How so?
Well, you can offer all government subsidies in the world, you can clear the regulatory red tape, you can prepare the land, but you are still ultimately subject to the harsh, unpredictable realities of global corporate finance. If the parent company hits a rough quarter, your sovereign megafab gets put on ice.
Yeah, it really brings us to the realities of the physical Earth itself, too. Reading through the European strategy, I kept coming back to this analogy.
Let's hear it.
It sounds like Europe is aggressively trying to build a world-class Michelin star restaurant completely from scratch.
Okay.
They're spending billions to hire the best chefs. They're building a beautiful state-of-the-art kitchen, but they're suddenly realizing they don't even own the farms to grow the ingredients.
That is an incredibly accurate way to frame it. You can build the most advanced foundry on the planet, but if you do not control the raw materials and the highly specialized machinery required to run it, your sovereignty is a total illusion.
So let's look at the raw materials first. We just mentioned the EU's goal to hit 20% global market share. To fuel that level of manufacturing, our sources project the EU's demand for raw silicon will hit 2 million tons by 2030.
2 million tons.
But currently, roughly 70% of the world's silicon supply is mined and processed in China.
That is a staggering choke point.
Yeah.
And it isn't just silicon. It involves a whole host of rare earth metals necessary for advanced electronics.
Right.
The EU acknowledges this vulnerability, though, which is why the CHIPS Act is paired with the Critical Raw Materials Act.
So, practically speaking, where does the EU suddenly find 2 million tons of silicon without relying on the current dominant suppliers.
They're forced to heavily subsidize domestic extraction and processing. For instance, the documents outline major investments pouring into expanding mining operations in the Asturias region of Spain.
Okay.
Meanwhile, in France, a consortium is building a massive facility near Bordeaux with the goal of producing 200,000 tons annually by 2027.
They are also leaning heavily into circular economy solutions, right?
Yes, big time. Recovering silicon and critical metals from end-of-life electronics. The goal is to create a closed loop where old smartphones and servers literally become the raw material for the next generation.
But the materials are really only half of the reality check here. The other half is the machinery itself. Because you cannot just melt down silicon in a furnace and pour a microchip like it's a candle.
No, you definitely cannot.
You need the tools. And that brings us to one of the most vital and secretive companies on Earth, ASML.
Oh, ASML. The Dutch firm ASML essentially holds a global monopoly on the most complex manufacturing machines ever conceived by human beings. They are the sole manufacturer of extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, lithography machines.
Describe one of these machines for the listener, because lithography machine sounds like something you'd find in a high school art room.
It is the absolute opposite of that.
No.
A single EUV machine costs roughly $350 million.
Unbelievable.
And it weighs as much as 2 commercial Airbus A320 jets.
2 jets.
Its entire purpose is to project light through a blueprint, bouncing it off incredibly precise mirrors to print circuits onto a silicon wafer at the atomic scale. We're talking about printing structures that are only a few atoms wide.
And physically, you just cannot manufacture the most advanced, cutting-edge AI chips in the world without an ASML machine. There is no alternative.
None. And ASML can only produce a very limited number of them each year due to how insane their complexity is.
So, if 70% of the raw silicon is controlled by one region, and the only machines capable of printing the advanced chips are controlled by a single Dutch company, and the engineering talent is scattered globally, I really have to ask.
Ask away.
Is semiconductor sovereignty just a delusion? Can Europe actually mine, recycle, and build its way to true independence, or is this policy ignoring the heavily entrenched, globalized nature of the industry?
Well, the economic sources address this tension directly. And the honest answer is that total, absolute independence is mathematically and physically impossible.
Impossible.
Yeah. The supply chain is far too complex for any single nation or bloc to do everything perfectly from dirt to finished product.
So what are they actually paying 43 billion euros for?
Leverage. The true goal of these policies isn't isolationism. It's about mitigating critical choke points. If you can produce enough mature chips domestically to ensure your auto industry survives a massive global supply shock, and you hold key nodes in the global chain, like the ASML machines, you have a seat at the table. You transition from a position of dangerous overdependence to a position of mutual interdependence. You make it too costly for anyone to cut you off.
That makes perfect sense. It's not about playing the game totally alone. It's about holding enough high-value cards that no one can kick you out of the game.
Exactly.
And to see how this incredibly dense web of, power technology, GaN physics, and European foundry subsidies actually plays out in the real world, we need to look at who is catching the money.
Right.
I was looking through the sources, and there is one specific company sitting right at the intersection of all these trends, XFAB.
XFAB is a perfect case study to bring all of this theory into reality.
Recently, XFAB caught the public eye because it got swept up in a massive viral social media-driven stock surge. Retail investors were treating it like a meme stock, just trading on hype.
Typical meme stock behavior.
Right. But underneath that chaotic retail volatility, financial outlets like Reuters and Bloomberg were pointing to a highly structural, long-term thesis that has absolutely nothing to do with internet memes.
The financial thesis relies entirely on the physical bottlenecks we've been discussing. XFAB has massive structural exposure to those 800-volt data center architectures and the broader AI infrastructure build-out.
Yeah, I pulled their Q1 2026 financial report from our source stack to see if the numbers actually back up the narrative. And the breakdown is fascinating. At first glance, their overall revenue actually dipped slightly down 4% year over year.
Okay.
But investors didn't care. Why? Because if you look at their specific wide bandgap division, which includes the gallium nitride and silicon carbide power devices we talked about earlier, that revenue skyrocketed by 152% year over year.
Wow. And furthermore, their actual shipments of silicon carbide wafers jumped 195%. That is not internet hype.
Not at all.
That is a tangible industrial desperation from data centers demanding components that can handle the 800-volt leap without catching fire.
But XFB isn't just riding the power wave. They're actively utilizing the European Chips Act. They are a designated Open EU foundry and a key manufacturing partner in a massive European consortium called Photonics FAB.
And this is where the technology takes another massive leap forward. Instead of just replacing silicon with GaN for power, the Photonics FAB project is trying to fundamentally change how data itself is transmitted.
Okay, this is cool.
They're building a European supply chain dedicated entirely to silicon photonics.
Let's unpack that. How does silicon photonics differ from what is in my smartphone right now?
A traditional microchip communicates using electrical signals. It pushes physical electrons through tiny, microscopic copper wires.
Right.
Silicon photonics entirely discards the copper wires. Instead, it uses microscopic lasers to send data via pulses of light through tiny optical waveguides etched directly into the silicon.
So it's like taking the massive fiber optic cables that run under the ocean and shrinking them down to the microscopic level inside a single chip.
Precisely. Because it uses light instead of physical electrons, the data moves significantly faster, it generates almost zero heat, and it can carry vastly more information simultaneously. For an AI network that needs to shuffle petabytes of data between thousands of GPUs instantly, silicon photonics is the holy grail of networking.
The partners involved in Photonics FAD really prove how serious this is. You have Nokia developing telecom transceivers, NVIDIA is evaluating the technology for their high-speed data center networks. But as I was reading down the list of partners, one startup completely stopped me in my tracks, a company called Arabal.
Arabal is utilizing the open foundry ecosystem to do something genuinely revolutionary.
According to the sources, Arabal is capturing digital odor data. We went from chips that handle power to chips that calculate data with light to chips that can literally smell.
It sounds crazy, but yes.
How does a laser beam help a microchip smell the air?
It requires an incredible intersection of biology and photonics. Arabal is building biosensors that are physically grafted onto these light-based silicon photonics chips. They coat the tiny photonic sensors with specialized biological materials, synthetic proteins, that are designed to react to volatile organic compounds. Those are the invisible molecules floating in the air that our brains interpret as scents.
So let's trace the path. A scent molecule is floating in the air. It hits this chip. What happens physically?
When that specific molecule physically binds to the biological coating on the sensor, it causes a microscopic change in the refractive index of the silicon waveguide.
Meaning it bends or slows the light passing through it, like looking through a glass of water?
Exactly like that. The interaction physically alters how the laser light travels through the chip. The chip detects that incredibly subtle shift in the light, digitizes that change, and feeds it into a machine learning algorithm that has been trained to identify the exact odor profile.
That is absolutely unbelievable. We are giving artificial intelligence a physical, digital sense of smell.
Yeah.
The sources mention applications ranging from quality control in the food industry to cosmetics, automotive diagnostics, and even real-time health and environmental monitoring.
And the crucial takeaway here is that this technology is being developed, refined, and manufactured entirely within the European supply chain ecosystem. They're utilizing the open EU foundries to scale up from a lab concept to commercial production.
Which is exactly what the ECA wanted.
Right. It illustrates exactly why controlling this infrastructure is so vital. It isn't just about making a chatbot type faster. It's about enabling entirely new ways for computers to interact with the physical world.
Okay, let's bring this all together for you, the listener. The next time you run a complex prompt on an AI tool or ask a system to generate an image, I want you to remember that you aren't just interacting with invisible code floating in a weightless cloud. You are actively triggering a massive physical chain reaction.
You're sending a signal that forces a gallium nitride transistor to violently step down 800 volts of direct current inside a server rack that is consuming the power equivalent of a small city.
And that physical chip was likely printed atom by an unimaginably complex $350 million Dutch machine relying on critical raw materials mined in Spain or recycled in France, all tied up in a high-stakes, multi-billion-euro geopolitical race for sovereignty.
It is a massive, physical, global ballet of raw resources, quantum engineering, and international policy, all executing in a fraction of a second.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to ponder. If our data centers are currently on track to consume 7% of all the power generated on Earth, and we are now deploying biological photonics chips that allow AI to physically sense the environment around them, like literally smelling the very air we breathe, at what point does our digital infrastructure become so deeply physically intertwined with our world that it stops being just a tool we use?
And becomes a vast artificial ecosystem that we have to actively manage and regulate alongside our natural one.
Exactly. From the illusion of the weightless cloud right back down to the heavy metal reality. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.